Photographs allow us to capture those special moments in our lives and hold on to them forever. Some photographs from history may look innocent on the surface, but deep down they are hiding a scary secret. Number 5. What do you think of when you see this photo? To most, this photo shows a group of hikers making their way through the harsh Russian wilderness, high in the Ural Mountains. However, this photograph has a dark undertone, as it became the last scary photograph ever taken of the group, who were found at Diatolov Pass in mid-1959. The Diatolov Pass incident has gone on to hunt Russian investigators, and over 60 years later, the investigation remains open. In January of 1959, Igor Diatolov and a group of 8 valiant hikers set off in the hopes of reaching the peak of one of the mountains located in the Ural mountain range in Russia. Diatolov put together a group of experienced hikers and outdoorsmen, and had no doubt about their abilities to navigate the harsh and unforgiving Russian landscape. Little did Diatolov know that the weather wouldn't be his undoing, and instead, he and his group would face a far worse fate. Before leaving for his great expedition, Diatolov promised to send a telegram when he returned from his once-in-a-lifetime trip, letting them in on all of the details. His friends waited and waited, but that telegram never came. Days passed, and when nobody had heard from Diatolov or his other companions, a search crew was sent to look for them. What this search crew would find would go on to haunt them and the Soviet Union forever. It wasn't until February of 1959 that the true fate of the hikers was discovered. Some had perished due to hypothermia, while others had sustained injuries that were unexplainable. A coroner noted that the injuries were equal to the effect of a car crash, but no one could explain who or what may have caused these injuries. It was determined that the hikers had entered the area now known as Diatolov's Pass on February 1st, 1959, and that this is when the incident occurred. Soviet officials were quick to dismiss the case, stating that the hikers had passed away due to hypothermia, but this didn't explain the injuries that most of them had sustained. The Soviet Union operated a policy of secrecy, and to avoid controversy from the outside world, they closed the case and kept it hidden. In 2019, a group of scientists reopened the case and hope to finally find answers in the coming years. Number 4. December 8th, 1980, the day that the world of music came to a standstill as news broadcasters around the world announced the passing of John Lennon, a member of the world's biggest boy band, the Beatles. The Beatles and their hordes of fans was a phenomenon in the 1960s. This was also the time that the word teenager began appearing in the dictionary, and young people across the world began getting their independence. The Beatles had taken the world by storm, collecting male and female fans across the globe. Whenever they played, wherever they played, they would be met with crowds of adoring fans waiting to catch a glimpse of their favorite band. In the US, a different type of superfan was emerging, one that would change the course of music history forever. Mark David Chapman, like many other people at the time, first heard the Beatles on TV and radio and instantly fell in love with them. Throughout their career, Mark followed them and even became a huge fan of John Lennon's music when the band split up in 1970. Despite being a huge Beatles fan, Mark became more and more disenfranchised with the Beatles and John Lennon in particular. It angered him that Lennon had said, quote, that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, and began pointing out hypocrisies in Lennon's lyrics and living in a fairer, freer world. Mark's wife, Gloria, told newspapers after the fact that he had said, quote, he, Lennon, told us to imagine no possessions, and there he was with millions of dollars and yachts and farms and country estates, laughing at people like me who had believed the lies and bought the records and built a big part of their lives around his music. 25-year-old Mark had also been reading The Catcher in the Rye and admitted to relating to the book's themes of isolation and loneliness, and how the main character, Holden Caulfield, hated people who he saw as phony. All of this internalized anger came to a head on December 8, 1980, when Mark waited outside of the Dakota Hotel where John Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono, lived. As John and Yoko walked to their limousine, Mark asked John to sign a copy of his record, and this infamous photo was snapped. This photo looks just like another fan getting a moment with their favorite artist, but little did John Lennon know that he had just taken a photograph with his killer. This wasn't the opportune moment for Mark, and he let John and his wife carry on walking to their limousine, watching as they drove into the distance. However, when they returned at 10:50 p.m. that same night, Mark was ready. As John Lennon and Yoko stepped out of the limousine, Mark ambushed them in the entryway to their apartment and shot Lennon 5 times. Yoko Ono was unharmed, but John Lennon was pronounced deceased when he arrived at the nearest hospital. Mark didn't flee the scene. Instead, he waited for the police to arrive and calmly read his copy of the book, The Catcher in the Rye. Mark David Chapman was sentenced to 20 years to life, and as of 2021 remains in prison, as his requests for parole have been rejected numerous times. In 2020, Mark gave an interview to the BBC, telling them, quote, "I just want to reiterate that I'm sorry for my crime. I have no excuse. This was self-glory. I want to add and emphasize greatly, it was an extremely selfish act. I'm sorry for the pain that I caused Yoko. I think about it all of the time. I deserve zero, nothing. If the law and you choose to leave me in here for the rest of my life, I have no complaint whatsoever." Number 3. The story of Beck Weather goes to show how strong and formidable humans can be, even in the direst of situations. Climbing Everest is one of the greatest achievements an outdoorsman can have. But after seeing the creepy images from Beck Weather's expedition, you may just think twice about your trip to Everest. In the spring of 1996, Beck, along with 8 other intrepid explorers, embarked on the trip of a lifetime to the summit of Mount Everest. Beck worked as a pathologist in Texas, but when he wasn't working, he was a keen hiker and outdoorsman, and believed that he had what it took to make it up the highest mountain in the world. Beck had completed the 7 summits by spring of 1996, when he was finally ready to take on the tallest of them all. Even with the threat of divorce and a failing marriage, Beck opted to climb Mount Everest, leaving behind his wife and children. Beck, along with his 7 companions, set off on May 10, 1996, from the base of Mount Everest, not knowing what was in store for them. During their ascent to the summit of Mount Everest, Beck began encountering problems. Just weeks before setting off on the once-in-a-lifetime trip, he had undergone laser eye surgery, but Beck could not have anticipated the effect that altitude and UV light exposure would have had on his healing eyes. The combination of these 2 factors made Beck's vision worse, leaving him unable to see in front of him. This meant that he relied on other members of the group, but as wind speeds picked up and snowstorms set in, it became harder and harder for Beck to keep up with the group. As wind speeds reached 157 miles per hour, and the temperature dropped to -29 degrees Celsius, the group's leader ordered Beck to stay where he was and promised him that on their way back down, they would come and get him. But the leader never came back. Hours passed and Beck waited for the group leader, but quickly realized that nobody was coming to help him. Night fell and the wind speeds only continued to rise. Beck lost a glove, exposing his hand to the freezing cold temperatures. He spent the next night alone in the same spot, waiting to be rescued by the group leader, despite other groups offering to take him down with them. By the next morning, the storm had finally let up, and his group began making their way to his location to collect him, with the intention of informing him that the group leader had sadly passed away, and that they hadn't been able to get to him sooner due to the weather conditions. However, when Beck was found by a Canadian doctor, the outlook was bleak. Beck had slipped into a hypothermic coma, and his jacket was open to the waist, and frostbite had set in on his hands and face. The doctor presumed that Beck wouldn't survive and left him where he had found him. Incredibly, Beck later awoke from the coma and managed to walk down to the camp, much to the shock of his campmates. As a result of being exposed to the elements, Beck's right hand, left hand fingers, and nose had all turned black and had to be amputated. Doctors performed skin grafts and, through the use of medical science, were able to create a new nose for him. In a 2003 interview with Texas Monthly, Beck said, quote, "I've been happier the past few years than I have been in my entire existence. I basically gave up a couple of body parts, which is a nuisance, but that's about it. What I gained was my wife and kids back." Number 2. April 1st, 1946 started like any other day for the residents of Hilo, Hawaii. As the early morning hours crept in, residents began waking up and going about their morning routines. Then at 6:54 a.m., an 8.6 magnitude earthquake triggered a tsunami that crashed upon the shores of Hilo Bay. For 15 minutes, Hilo Bay and the surrounding areas were hit with gigantic waves that swept away everything in its path. One 100-foot wave swept into a small village, crushing everything in sight. Everything in Hilo Bay had been destroyed, save for a Coca-Cola bottling plant. Thousands of homes, businesses, schools, and hospitals had been swept away within a matter of minutes, and the Hilo tsunami became Hawaii's most destructive. All of the Hawaiian islands were affected by the tsunami. However, Hawaii Island, where Hilo is located, was the worst affected. In total, 159 people lost their lives, and thousands of others were injured. Homes, roads, businesses, and schools had been flattened, and now the people of Hilo had nowhere to turn. During the disaster, many photographs were taken, and it's this one in particular that provides a harrowing insight into that day. At first, it looks as if the photo is just of the waves rushing in, but upon closer inspection, something very scary can be seen in the bottom left. Looking closer, you can see an unknown person helplessly looking up at their surroundings. The person in the photograph has never been identified, and we don't know whether they survived or became one of the 159 unlucky ones. James U.C. Lowe, who lived in Hilo in 1946, told historians, quote, "When I looked up, I couldn't believe my eyes, because here was this huge, huge wave. Nothing that I've ever seen in my life. It was like a wall of water." This photograph serves as a reminder of just how destructive nature can be. Number 1. What do you see when looking at this picture? Perhaps you think of an old-timey person posing for their photograph, ensuring to stay perfectly still so that the photo can develop. In reality, you're looking at the mugshot of one of the Old West's most infamous outlaws, Pete Spence. Not much is known about Pete's early life, other than he was born in Texas or Louisiana, according to census records. We also know that he had listed himself as a stock raiser, but in reality, he was a cowboy of the Old West, making his money through illegal means. Between 1878 and 1883, Pete terrorized Arizona with cowboy associates Frank and Tom McClory, and Ike and Billy Clanton. The band of men would ride around committing crimes together, stealing horses, drinking, and altogether getting up to no good. The group built up quite the reputation for themselves. So in 1881, when travelers making their way along the Sandy Bob line were held up, the U.S. Marshal, Virgil Earp, knew exactly who to question first. Pete became the main suspect in the investigation, which angered him and put Virgil Earp in his bad books. Pete was eventually arrested for this crime, but was released after there was no evidence against him. Despite the courts finding him innocent and allowing him to walk away as a free man, Pete still had a vendetta against Virgil. That hatred culminated, and on March 18, 1882, Pete took revenge on Virgil by attacking his brother, Morgan, as he sat and drank at a parlor in Tombstone, Arizona. It's believed that both brothers were the intended target. However, only Morgan was struck. The bad blood between Virgil and Pete intensified, with Virgil vowing to put Pete away for the rest of his life for what he had done to his brother. Realizing the consequences of his actions, Pete Spence fled Arizona and moved to Georgetown, New Mexico, opting to leave his cowboy life behind. In 1883, Pete found himself in trouble with the law once more, after being convicted of manslaughter. During his 18 months in prison, his mugshot was taken, and it's the only known photograph of one of the most lawless cowboys. After serving 18 months of his 5-year sentence, Pete was pardoned and released. He passed away in 1914 at the age of 62. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.